Here is your story, 3,000 words, clean language, no headings, no part labels. Just the story. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight when the Alpha King arrived at the border town of Ashwell. Nobody announced him. That was the first strange thing. Kings sent riders ahead. Kings sent declarations and formal letters and men in polished armor to clear the road. Elias Vorn sent nothing. He simply appeared at the edge of town in the dark and the wet, with 42 soldiers behind him and 3 of them bleeding badly enough to need help before morning. The infirmary was the only building with its lights on. It was always the only building with its lights on. Nora Fell was in the middle of reorganizing her supply shelves when the door opened. She had been reorganizing the same shelf for 20 minutes because she could not sleep, and reorganizing things was the closest she got to peace on restless nights. She counted bandage rolls. She moved the iodine bottles to the left, then moved them back. She had just decided the brown bottles looked better on the right when the door swung open and the cold came in with the rain and the soldiers. She turned around. There were too many of them for the room. That was her first thought, not who they were, not the insignia on their coats, just the practical fact that this space held 12 people comfortably and there were at least 15 crowding the entrance already, with more visible behind them in the dark. "I need beds for my injured," said a voice from the back of the group. The crowd shifted and a man came through the center of it the way water finds the lowest point, without effort, without announcement, simply arriving. He was tall. He was wearing a traveling coat so dark with rain it had stopped having a color. His face was the kind of face that had been weathered not by sun but by decision, by years of making choices that other people then had to live with. She would find out later he was the Alpha King. At that moment she only knew he was the one in charge, because every person in the room was watching him the way people watch weather. "How many injured?" she asked. 7. 3 serious. "Bring the 3 serious ones in first. Everyone else waits outside or finds the tavern 2 streets over." She pointed at the door. "Coats off before they bleed on my floor, please. I just washed it." There was a pause. It was the kind of pause that happened when people were not used to being told what to do in a building someone else owned. Then the man in the dark coat nodded once. "You heard her." Everyone moved. She worked for the next 2 hours without stopping. The 3 serious cases took everything she had: a soldier with a deep cut along his side that had been poorly wrapped in the field, a second with a broken arm set wrong in the dark, and a third with a fever already climbing past the point that made her comfortable. She reset the arm. She cleaned and properly closed the side wound. She packed the feverish soldier in cold compresses and sent someone to boil water and told them exactly how long and exactly what temperature and did not apologize for being specific about it. The man in the dark coat stayed. He did not get in her way. He stood near the back wall. She noticed he had chosen the spot with the clearest view of both the door and the room, and he watched. He did not pace. He did not issue further orders. He simply stood there with his hands behind his back and watched her work with the focused attention of someone studying something they wanted to understand. It made her slightly nervous, which made her slightly annoyed, which was actually helpful because annoyance was a clean and manageable feeling and she worked well when she was mildly annoyed. She was wrapping the arm of the last patient, a young soldier, barely 20, who was trying very hard not to make any sound and doing reasonably well at it, when she noticed the man against the wall. Not just noticed him as a presence in the room, but noticed his left forearm. The sleeve was dark. Too dark, even for a coat soaked through with rain. She finished with the young soldier. She walked to her supply cart. She took out a clean cloth, a small bottle, and a length of bandage. She walked to the man against the wall and without asking, without explaining, she took his left arm and turned it over. He let her. That surprised her. The cut was a clean one, several inches along the inside of his forearm. Old enough to have stopped bleeding but not old enough to be safe. She cleaned it. She pressed the cloth down and held it. She did not look at his face while she did this. She focused on the work. "How did you know?" he said. His voice was different when it was quiet. In the crowd it had been a command. Like this it was just a question, direct and plain and oddly young. "Your sleeve," she said. "The rain soaks coats evenly. Yours was darker on the left." He looked at his own arm. "I didn't notice." People often don't notice their own wounds, she said. They're too busy watching everyone else's. She wrapped the bandage and tied it off neatly. She moved back to her cart and began counting her remaining supplies, because she needed to know what she had used and what she would need to request, and also because the man was still looking at her with that same focused attention, and the counting gave her something to do with her hands. "You're the king," she said. It was not a question. "Yes." "Your men didn't say so." "I told them not to." She considered that. She moved the iodine to the right again. "Why?" "Because when people know who I am before they see what I need, they stop responding to what I need and start responding to who I am," he said. "The response is less useful." She thought about that. "That's very practical." "I try to be." "Sit down," she said. "You've been standing for 2 hours." Another pause. She expected the same kind as before, the not used to being told pause. Instead he just said, "There isn't a chair." She went to the back room and brought out a crate and set it near the wall where he'd been standing and went back to her cart. After a moment, she heard him sit down. She made tea on the small stove in the back room. She was not sure why. She made it in her usual way, in the old dented pot, and she brought 2 cups back and set one beside him without comment. He did not comment either. She sat on the floor with her back against the supply shelf because the only other crate was across the room and she was too tired to go get it. He did not drink the tea immediately. He held the cup. After a while he drank it. She drank hers. The infirmary had gone quiet. The patients were sleeping or resting. Outside, the rain continued its steady work on the town. "How long have you worked here?" he asked. "Since my designation," she said. The word settled in the room. She had said it the same way she'd say since Tuesday or since winter, as a simple marker of time, not a wound, not a complaint. He was quiet for a moment. "That doesn't bother you?" Saying it like that. "I decided it wouldn't," she said. "It took a while, but I decided." He looked at the cup in his hands. "I'm not sure I know how to decide things like that." "What kinds of things?" "How to feel about what I am," he said. She looked at him then. He was looking at the floor. For a moment, just one, he looked exactly like the young soldier who had been trying not to make any sound. Like someone managing something very large in a very small amount of space. "You're the king of everything north of the Ember Mountains," she said. "What do you feel about that?" "Responsible," he said. "Mostly just responsible." A tin fell off the shelf. Not dramatically, it just tipped and clattered to the stone floor, and a small striped cat walked in from the back room and looked at it with great interest and then looked at both of them with the expression of a creature who wanted credit for something. "Gerald," Nora said to the cat. "That was yours and you know it." Gerald sat down and began cleaning his left ear. Elias looked at the cat. Then, very quietly, something happened in the corner of his mouth. It lasted about 1 second and then it was gone. But she heard it, a single short sound, low and startled, like a man discovering a room in his house he had forgotten existed. He had laughed. It was the smallest laugh she had ever witnessed. It was also clearly the most recent one he'd had in a long time. She smiled into her tea and did not remark on it. Gerald walked over and sat on the king's boot with the complete confidence of a cat who had never once been told he couldn't. They sat like that for a long time. The rain came down. Somewhere in the main room one of the soldiers was snoring steadily and with great commitment. Gerald fell asleep on the boot. Elias did not move the cat. She started telling him about a patient she had lost 2 winters ago. A child, 6 years old, brought in too late from one of the outlying farms. She had never told this story to anyone, not because it was secret but because she had never found anyone who would sit still long enough for it. She told it plainly and completely. She described the child's name and the color of his coat and the particular silence of that night after. Elias said nothing. He sat with his back against the wall and Gerald on his boot, and he listened, not in the way that people listened while waiting to respond, but in the way that people listened when they had decided that what you were saying mattered more than what they were going to say next. She talked until she ran out of words. Then she sat quietly. Then, somewhere between one breath and the next, she was asleep, her head tipped back against the supply shelf, mid-sentence about something Gerald had done in November. Elias did not move. He sat for 40 minutes more in the same position. He was aware of this because he was aware of time the way all military men were. It was a resource, tracked automatically, constantly calculated against what remained. He had 40 minutes of stillness. He could not remember the last time he had 40 minutes of stillness. He could not, trying honestly, remember the last time stillness had felt like something other than a problem to solve. He looked at the sleeping woman with her back against the supply shelf and her empty teacup on the floor beside her, and the cat now migrated to her lap, and he thought, she is the least afraid person I have met in 11 years of meeting people. Then he thought, I came back. He didn't mean in the literal sense, he was here, he hadn't left. He meant something else, something without clean language, something that felt like the first step of a very long walk he had already taken without deciding to take it. He was still sitting there when the first gray light came under the door. Captain Dre found him at dawn. Dre was a large, practical man who had been with Elias for 11 years and had survived it by developing a perfect professional neutrality. He looked at the room. He looked at the king on the crate. He looked at the woman asleep against the shelf. He looked at Gerald. My lord, he said. The convoy should move within the hour. Elias stood carefully so he did not disturb Gerald, who had strong opinions about being disturbed. He rolled his left sleeve down over the clean bandage. He walked to the door with Dre and gave 3 quiet orders about supply rotation for the patients who were staying, and then he said he needed 1 moment and went back inside. He told himself it was to check on the soldier with the fever. He checked on the soldier with the fever. The fever had broken in the night. The young soldier was sleeping with the deep, uncomplicated sleep of someone whose body had fought something and won. Elias stood in the doorway of the back room. Nora was awake. She was already at the stove, already moving, already humming something low and tuneless. She looked up when she heard him. Neither of them said anything. She took the old dented pot off the stove. She poured what was left of last night's tea into a cup. It had been sitting since midnight. It was completely cold. She held it out to him. He took it. He walked out of the infirmary carrying cold tea. He rode the first full hour of the journey north with it in his hand. His second-in-command rode beside him and said absolutely nothing about the cup, which was the greatest professional courtesy Dre had ever extended him. 6 months passed. The capital was beautiful in the way that capitals were beautiful, enormous and certain of itself, decorated with the kind of confidence that came from never having to wonder if it would survive the winter. Elias moved through it efficiently. He signed treaties. He held councils. He reviewed military reports and made decisions that affected thousands of people and felt their weight and carried it the way he always had, steadily, without sharing it, the way you carry something heavy when there is no one to take the other end. His steward came to him in the 3rd month with a routine report on northern supply chains. Elias was reading and listening with one part of his attention, which was enough for routine reports, when the steward mentioned the border settlements. The infirmary at the Fell district has been rerouted to the northern depot, the steward said. Someone in the supply office updated it. Elias turned a page. When? 3 months ago, my lord. We're not sure who initiated. I did, Elias said. The steward paused. My lord. I rerouted it, he said. He turned another page. It was inefficient. The steward made a note and moved on. Elias continued reading. He did not examine what he had just said or what it implied. He simply continued reading because that was the most efficient response to information he was not yet ready to think about. He thought about it that night. He thought about it for 3 nights in a row, actually, lying in a bed that was large and well-made and warm and somehow profoundly inadequate. On the 4th night he got up and told Captain Dre they were inspecting the northern border route. Dre said, yes, my lord, in the voice of a man with 11 years of opinions and perfect professional discipline. It was raining again when they reached Ashwell. Elias decided this was not meaningful. It rained often in the north, it was the north, rain was a simple fact of northern geography and had nothing to do with anything else. He dismounted in the street outside the infirmary. The light was on. It was always on. He walked to the door. He stopped. He raised his hand and knocked. He had never knocked on a door in his life. Not once. He was not being dramatic about this, it was simply true. Doors opened for him. People opened them. That was how it had always worked. He knocked on this one, 3 plain knocks with his knuckles on the old wood, and waited. Footsteps. A pause. The door opened. Nora looked at him. She looked at the rain on his coat. She looked at the convoy behind him in the street with the perfect stillness of a large group of men pretending not to watch something. "You're going to track mud in," she said. She stepped back from the door. He walked in. He tracked mud in. He did not apologize. She did not ask him to. She went back to the stove and put the pot on. Gerald appeared from somewhere and wound around his boots once and then walked away with the satisfied air of someone completing a scheduled task. He stayed 3 days. Captain Dre sent a single dispatch back to the capital that read, "Delay. King's orders." He included no further detail. He had been learning this from Elias for 11 years. On the first evening Nora told him about a patient who had recovered unexpectedly. On the second evening he told her something he had never told anyone, about a campaign in his early 20s, before the Crown, when he had made one decision that had cost 11 men their lives and how he had been responsible for it and had gone on being responsible for it every day since without ever saying it aloud. She listened the way he had listened to her that first night. Completely. Without rush. On the third morning she was changing a patient's dressing. She was not looking at him. She was focused on her work, hands steady, and she said it very casually, the way she said everything that mattered most. "You can just stay, you know." She said it the way she'd said, "I know what I am," 6 months ago. Like bedrock. Like a door already open. He was standing by the window. He was doing what he always did, counting exits, assessing the room, the habit of 11 years of needing to know how to leave every space he stood in. He looked at the door. He looked at the window. He looked at the woman with her steady hands and her cold tea and her cat and her particular, hard-won certainty about who she was. He said, "I know." 2 words. Quiet. No decoration. She nodded once and kept working. Gerald knocked something off a shelf. Outside the rain had stopped and the early light was coming in yellow and plain through the infirmary window, the ordinary light of a morning that had decided to be good. The Alpha King, who had won every campaign and every negotiation and every room he had ever stood in, put his coat on the hook by the door, not because he was staying for the day, but because he was staying, and poured himself cold tea from the pot without being offered it, and sat down on the crate by the wall. It fit him better now. He had stopped looking for the exit. End.